to get started, having the opportunity to virtually come to Stuttgart reminds me of the last time that I was in Stuttgart. And I don't remember if any of the Stuttgart local participants are heavy metal fans, but back in 2019, when Manowar was doing their final tour of Germany, I was in, I think it was Frankfurt, Trier, and Stuttgart were the three shows that I was in the country to see. And they ended up canceling the Stuttgart show, like day of show or the morning before the show, because one of the band members had food poisoning. And it was certainly not the first Manowar show that I'd had canceled, but it was the most disappointing. And yes, Jessica, the ruins in and around Trier, I think they're old Roman ruins. If my local guide, if I remember what he shared with me correctly, are very beautiful. It was raining the entire time that I was there, so I didn't enjoy too much of it, but the show and the company were fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you both for the opportunity and for the warm welcome. As we get started, I want to encourage everyone as we go through the session. I tend to get started and I run with it and I don't stop and I don't come up for air. So I am going to have the chat window open on the screen that I am not sharing. If you have any questions, you have any comments, you have any feedback, put it in there. I will watch it as I can. And if there's something that you just can't wait to share or a question that you want to ask right now, just unmute and join the conversation. We've got a relatively small group today, so we can make this work. And as we go, I want to start off with a quick introduction. I do know that I tend to be public and out there, so you may know me already, but not everyone does. And I want to introduce myself in a way that kind of sets up the content that we have in today's session. So I've been working in data for around 25 years, which is terrifying to say, but I've been working at Microsoft for about half of that. In my pre-Microsoft life, I was a trainer, a mentor, a consultant, a data architect. I did a lot of SQL Server work. I did a lot of integration services work. Was also a development consultant for years before I started specializing more in data. And when I joined Microsoft, I spent a few years in the learning space. And then I worked as a program manager on SQL Server integration services, master data services, data quality services, the first generation of Power BI. So if you remember the query sharing capabilities in that information catalog back in the day when Power BI was just a bunch of add-ins for Excel, those were capabilities that I shipped. I worked on Azure Data Catalog Gen 1, and in my current role for the past 3.5 years, I've been working as a member of the Power BI CAT team or customer advisory team, where essentially I work with some of the biggest Power BI customers in the world, like customers with tens of thousands of active Power BI users. And I help understand their problems so that we can improve Power BI in ways that makes it a better tool and a better platform for these large-scale business intelligence or large-scale analytics needs. And in this context, what I've heard is that the current state of business intelligence introduces some real challenges for succeeding with BI at true global enterprise scale in 2021, like in our modern times. So as we're queuing up for a discussion about data culture, we really need to start with a review of the context in which that data culture is going to operate, because understanding the terrain of the battle, as it were, is really important to understanding some of the constraints and some of the actions that we will need to succeed in that battle. So back in the day, the idea of having an OLTP system, like having a computer system that tracked data, this was really interesting and really cool and really rare. But as soon as we had data, people wanted reports on it. And once we had more than one system, people, business users, decision makers, they wanted reports that included data from multiple systems, having them mashed up so that the view of customer or product or another common business domain from one system was included with the other view of that data from another system. And this introduced challenges that the data warehouse pattern, not necessarily a relational data warehouse per se, but a data warehouse pattern that could be a data warehouse, a data mart, an operational data store, a data lake, or a combination of these. We basically evolved the architectural patterns to include this staging and aggregation location where there's this common thing that then provides data for downstream reporting. The introduction of this centerpiece in the architecture introduced the need for a data preparation layer, which is ELT, ETL, ETLT, whatever your pattern is. You need to get the data from where it's produced, reshaped into the right location for downstream analytics. And as more and more people wanted to use this data, an additional component was introduced, which was our analytics models or OLAP models. Could be a cube, could be a tabular model. There's lots of ways to implement this. But basically, this is what the state of the art looked like 20 years ago. And a key characteristic of this was that every single piece along the way required a technical person to develop. So you needed developers to build the source systems. You needed developers to build the data transformation. You needed developers to build the reports. And self-service business intelligence, whether it's Power BI or Tableau or ClickView, there's a whole industry out there. But self-service BI was introduced because IT was a bottleneck. So the IT team simply could not keep up with the demands of the business and the changing needs of the business. And this meant that either decisions were being made that weren't informed by data, or decisions were being delayed because the data was late in coming. Even today, if you as a business user go to your IT team and say, I need this data added to the data warehouse, you're probably going to wait multiple months before the data that you need right now is available. So as the self-service business intelligence capabilities have evolved, what we have in Power BI today is basically a complete end-to-end business users can do whatever the heck they want, right? And if you think about the broader Power Platform with Power Apps and Power Automate, you could basically extend my little self-service BI rectangle to include those source systems as well, because more and more commonly, business users are building the upfront transactional systems using these low-code, no-code platforms. And the great thing is that self-service BI and these citizen development tools, they allow more business users who are intimately familiar with the problems that they're trying to solve. They allow those business users to solve the problems themselves because they're lowering the cost of entry by having more persona-appropriate capabilities and business user-friendly or business user-accessible tools. So problem solved, right? So sadly, that is not the case. So allowing more business users to produce more data artifacts and more part of this end-to-end system, even though it did eliminate a lot of the IT as a bottleneck problem, it simply introduced new problems as well: data consistency, data reliability, data availability, a lot of the things that technical people do because they were trained and educated to do. Business users don't have that background and may not have the same priorities that a developer working in a BI group in IT would. So as we're moving from talking about business intelligence to talking about data culture, one of the things that I want to do is I want to introduce a few concepts for the way that I think about these terms as I'm using them throughout this conversation. And the first one is the concept of a culture. So not necessarily data culture, but a culture are those beliefs, customs, behaviors, and activities that bring a group of people together. So the most common expressions of this for human culture are things like music and food, liberal democracy, or other types of government. All of these things together, and even something as tactical as which side of the road do I drive on, or what are the speed limits and expectations, all of these things come together in these complex and amorphous ways to define how these groups of people think about and act about common areas of interest. And if we apply this to the concept of being more data-driven, very often a data culture is an organizational culture, so like a business or other organization where those common beliefs, activities, and behaviors revolve around having access to data and making data-driven decisions rather than relying on tribal knowledge or past personal experience. So that data culture is really a change in those behaviors and activities. And it's worth emphasizing, not sure why my slide, there we go. It's worth emphasizing that a culture is what you do, not what you say. So if everybody talks about using the right data and having a single source of truth and all these other things, but everybody is actually going out and building their own shadow solutions and reporting on their own numbers instead of the correct numbers, then the culture is the behavior, not what's being said. And it's not my intent to read this slide or hopefully any of the slides today, but these are the characteristics that having a successful and mature data culture can help you achieve, where everybody is making decisions based on the current, complete, correct data. Everybody is looking at the same data. Data is accessible to the people that need it, and the people that are responsible for controlling and governing it, they have the oversight and the understanding about who's doing what with what data, in what way, and it is easy for people that need access to it to get access to it through the appropriate channels. And perhaps most importantly, these behaviors are recognized and rewarded by the people in positions of influence and positions of authority. So the people, imagine, so this is like a variation on a true story for me. So imagine coming into an executive review type meeting, quarterly business review, something like that. Back in the day at Microsoft, it used to be that the first 20 or 30 minutes of an hour-long meeting were people arguing about numbers, like, where did this come from? My numbers don't look like that. Are you sure that's right? And this lack of alignment on the right numbers to drive decisions, it delayed and hampered a lot of productivity. So things moved much more slowly. And one of the things that Satya Nadella has driven through the data culture that his executive leadership has been driving both from the top down and from the bottom up is the fact that for some numbers, you have to use this official source. And if you were to bring your own numbers representing these common business data domains into a meeting, you would get chastised and those numbers would not be looked at. Like you need to leave and come back once you're using the right data. And all of these, where's the data coming from conversations have gone away because of the progress that we've made from a data culture perspective. And as we move into the meat of the session, this is perhaps the most important thing to recognize. And I use Satya Nadella as an example deliberately because without an executive sponsor, your efforts to build a data culture in your organization will fail. So there's drop the mic. I can walk away now. This is perhaps the most important thing. All of the effort around changing people's behaviors to be more data-driven, to use common, shared, well-known data sources, you can't do this on your own, and you can't do it successfully at scale from the bottom up. Very often, the scope of your culture, the scope of the data culture that you're able to build is defined by the scope of authority for the executive sponsor behind that effort. And if you ever, like back in the day, like 20 years ago, back before I worked at Microsoft, data warehousing projects were very much like this, or this was my first example of this, where if you came in and you were talking with departmental managers, instead of talking to like the IT director or the chief information officer, the conversations that you had with the lower level managers, they basically weren't part of a path to success, because at some point your data warehouse would need data that this person couldn't give you permissions to access. And then you or he or she would need to go knock on doors and set up meetings to justify why you needed these numbers. And that for data warehousing, because this is much more of a known problem and solution domain today, it doesn't feel like as big of a problem to me. But when you're working with a large organization trying to change behaviors for people that you don't get to assign tasks to, so you have influence but not authority, you need that executive sponsor both to help knock down walls, to get people to reply to your emails, or to acknowledge the importance of the requests that you're making, but also that executive sponsor should be someone who demonstrates how important it is to do those things that I described earlier. It's like using the right data, being data-driven, having access to the data and the tools to use it. So imagine if your executive, so the VP, the CEO, the CIO, whoever it is, if they, as part of their daily meetings, their weekly, monthly, and quarterly reviews, and all of their broad email communication, that it was constantly emphasizing how that executive, that leader, is using these data resources, like calling out the reports that they're getting the data from, and the importance of using that central, well-known data and all of the tools to be agile and responsive. If this is part of what the executive is constantly doing and communicating, everything just gets easy. And the example here that I have on this slide is like, if you don't have executive sponsorship, it's like running a marathon in sand. If you've ever run a marathon, and for me, that means 5K, that's as long as I ever hope to run. But if you've ever run a marathon, it's hard on its own. Like if it's flat and it's on a road and you've got good shoes and a good running surface, building a data culture is hard. Doing it without an executive sponsor is very, very difficult. So I have two big sections for the tasks that you need to perform, or what I see large enterprise Power BI customers doing to be successful in their efforts to build data cultures and become more data-driven, to get better returns on their investment in data and analytics. And I've broken it down into two different parts, the easy part and the hard part. And the easy part is technology. And just spoiler alert, the hard part will be people, but we'll get to that next. But essentially what we have for the easy part of developing a data culture is recognizing that there is no one size fits all for data sources, for data applications, or for the use of data. And one of the most common and important steps that successful organizations take is identifying consistent and clearly communicated criteria and responsibilities for what data requires more management, what data requires less management, who is allowed to do what, and who is required to do what. So this diagram I have stolen from the Power BI adoption framework. The one thing that I added was the animation on the line. So watch this. The line goes up, the line goes down. It doesn't matter where you draw the line. What matters is that it is drawn somewhere and it's understood what management goes with what data. So if you look at the pyramid diagram, or the triangle that's here, you'll notice that at the bottom, there's personal reporting and project reporting. It's wider because there's a lot more of this going on, but it's further down because the scope of impact and the range of distribution for any one of these solutions is much smaller. And as a general rule, successful organizations say any user can perform their own personal analytics on any data with no or very minimal management, assuming that they have permissions to access the data sources. So this is basically saying the things that you're doing for yourself and your small team, IT, the central BI team, they never even need to know about it. That you do what you need to do, it's all good. But the broader the scope of content distribution, the greater the needs for oversight, for curation, for management, for governance, the needs for these maturity expenses, like the tax of management, the needs get greater. And if you look at the things that are all the way up at the top of the triangle, you have those data that are subject to compliance, the permanent record, something that gets reported out to the Securities and Exchange Commission or whatever your regulatory body is. Like here in the US, we have regulation known as Sarbanes-Oxley, which if you boil it down, it's saying any numbers that are reported publicly for your organization's finances, you need to be able to justify them, to say where they came from. There's like all sorts of details around it. And if you report the wrong numbers, the executives for your organization can be subject to criminal penalties, including like federal felony, like long prison term sentences. So imagine if you screw up a report, your executive goes to jail. Odds are that's going to need more management than the report that gets sent to you and your team. The key thing is there's no one size fits all. There's no simple answer to say do it this way, but you need to define, given the constraints and the priorities and the data of your organization, what needs more management and what needs less management. One of the most common ways that I've seen this described by the enterprise Power BI customers that I work with is using these tiers or rings. So this is kind of like I've taken that triangle and I've squeezed it down into a circle where at the outermost parts of the ring, so greatest surface area but least impact, we've got that personal reporting. Everybody's got Power BI Desktop or Excel. They might not even have a pro license, so they might just work in Power BI Desktop with a free license for data sets that have been published to a premium capacity so they can do their self-service reporting for their own purposes. Everybody has access to it, and everybody can do what they need to make better data-driven decisions for their job. And it could also just mean that they're consuming reports that someone else has published. Not everybody needs to be an author. As we get further towards the middle, there's often team BI solutions where this is typically where you have someone inside a business group that has a pro license. Because the distribution is small, the consumers or the readers will typically also have a pro license. But this is very often like the finance manager that is most comfortable with Power BI. He's producing ugly but functional reports for his team and for their day-to-day work. As we get further and further towards the middle, there's departmental BI where there may be an embedded BI team, like someone who's had more training and more technical skills that is producing reports for a business unit or a department. They might get managed more heavily and published to a premium capacity, again, for the licensing benefits and cost reduction that can come with that when you have lots and lots of readers. And then most organizations are using, and let me rephrase that, most of the enterprise organizations that I work with who are standardizing on Power BI, most of them also have their central BI team, which often lives in IT. They're developing these central enterprise BI solutions using Power BI and integrating it in with all of their development processes and best practices, so that if someone is developing a single application that will target tens of thousands of monthly users, odds are it's going to fit into that bucket. And even though it's being developed in a tool that has self-service BI capabilities, it's actually being developed by professional developers, not by business users or self-service BI folks. So this is my generalized view of this approach. actually have one customer, which is a retail customer based in North America, that when I spoke with them a few years ago, they described their approach this way, and it mapped so closely, so cleanly to this generalized model. I'm like, oh my God, have you been looking at my notes? Have you been stealing my slides? Because for this organization, which has many thousands of users, so think like retail superstores where a given store might have produce, it might have a butcher, it might have a floral department, it might have like a hardware department or dry goods, paper towels, that sort of thing. And every single one of their employees, from the stock boys and cashiers up to the store managers and district managers and the executives at HQ, they all have Power BI licenses. So they have an enterprise license, like E5 agreement sort of thing. And this means that anybody can work with data. And their central team over the years has created data sets for most of these data domains so that, like, literally, if you're a cashier and you're wondering more about the business, you can go to computers in the store and work with Power BI and work with the data that you have access to. There are some key departments, like I mentioned floral and the meat department or the butcher department. Imagine the physical characteristics of these different products and how their supply chain, their life cycle, their ordering, their inventory management for something with such a short, time-sensitive shelf life would differ from something like hardware or paper goods. So these departments will often have more data that's made available to them and have more resources that are made available simply because of the business domain themselves. Getting closer and closer in, some departments, or some, especially the key departments, but many departments will have power users who are what I will refer to later on as champions. So they're people that work in those departments, but they are the ones that are more curious, more eager, they're more data-centric by nature. This company, this business has basically said, we value and recognize what you're doing to go above and beyond your core job responsibilities. So here's additional training, maybe a better computer, maybe more access to things, so that this finance guy or this store manager or what have you can dig in and do more with the data that's available, giving them more resources so that they can produce more business value through the efforts that they were going to take anyway. And at the center of things, this one organization referred to that enterprise BI as hardcore IT. It's like, yeah, this is the hardcore IT. This is the team that I manage, the person that I was talking to at the time managed, where we've got this whole team of professional developers. And he then talked about how his team of professional developers interacted with this universe of self-service BI users across the organization. And I'm going to sort of zoom in to that hardcore IT circle. So notice that now the left-hand side of the slide is it's like the right-hand side of my little ring diagram. And I'm now exploding out the central ring, that hardcore IT ring, to demonstrate how they work with solutions that are developed by self-service BI users across the organization. Because this is really another key aspect of the easy part. Remember, we're still talking about the easy part here. But this is a key aspect of successfully building a data culture, recognizing that there's no one size fits all, because at some point, a business user is going to develop a self-service solution that, based on those clear and consistent criteria that we mentioned on the triangle slide, that it actually belongs in an IT managed solution so that it can be maintained and secured and have an SLA and be treated as the flagship resource, this important resource that it is. And for this one organization, what they've done is they've defined a 4-stage promotion process where any self-service BI user can come to this central BI team and say, I have a solution that I would like to hand off to you. And they've got different patterns of engagement. I'm simplifying things pretty heavily here, but through office hours or other standard engagement points, I, as a finance analyst or other business user, I can come in, I can get a buddy from IT, and together we will look at what I have built to understand the data, to understand the solutions, to prove out ideas, and to demonstrate that this actually does fit into a solution or a domain that IT is responsible for. And assuming that it does, we'll move on together to the next stage, which is the promotion stage. We'll set up a gateway, we'll get scheduled refresh, we'll apply like the organizational themes, color, layout, and so on, so that it is a more usable and reliable BI application. And at that point, they evaluate again, and basically they're checking, does it make sense to fully hand this off to IT, or is having IT help the business owner get get the gateway set up, get the data sources through a scheduled refresh, that sort of thing, is that going to be enough? Not every application goes all the way, and not everyone needs to, because one size does not fit all. But assuming that it does, the next stage, that preparation phase, is figuring out where the data should actually live. So very often, a self-service solution is getting data from self-service sources like Excel files or SharePoint lists or things like that. That preparation phase will involve doing the data engineering work to get that data into SQL Server, SQL Azure, like some supported standard high-performance data source. They'll flesh out documentation. They'll identify who will be the business owner, the IT owner, the data steward, like all of the roles that they need to treat this as an official supported application. And then when that's done, operationalization is the final step or the final stage, where from this point on, IT, that central BI team, pro BI developers in IT, they own it, they maintain it. They work with their support team to make sure that the support team is ready to support it. They've got an SLA. You can file tickets to say that this thing isn't working, because even though it started off originally being developed by a business user, it's now been fully handed off to IT. It's owned by them, because at each step of that progression, there were well-defined gates or requirements to progress to the next one. And when it's done, IT owns it. The business user can take advantage of the work that he's done, but he doesn't need to maintain it. And maybe he can go on to solve the next set of problems because he doesn't have to worry about this one yet. In Microsoft, we often describe this pattern as discipline at the core and flexibility at the edge, where there is a small number of very high value, very complex data domains, typically around numbers and revenue. It's like finance is the driver for a lot of this. But these are owned and maintained by that one team. And then we also have the flexibility at the edge, which says all authorized users can do their own self-service BI on these numbers, but they need to use these numbers. But for things that aren't part of that managed core of data, you can bring in your own additive data. So your Excel workbooks, your SharePoint lists, data from other non-supported sources, as long as the managed data where it exists, you're using it in a way that aligns with its intent. And by taking this approach, Microsoft Finance basically broke the chains of the cowboy culture that Microsoft used to have. There's a lot of emphasis on individual solutions and fast progress. And when you have a whole bunch of data-happy geeks, whether they're in IT or various business groups, you'll often end up with lots of redundant solutions that may not have consistent definitions for consistent, well-known data domains. This is the problem that Microsoft has solved to one degree or another. We invented new problems once this one was done, but for those high-value, high-impact data domains, that discipline at the core for this highly managed data really, really makes a difference, and it enables everything else to move faster through that flexibility at the edge. So, and here I want to jump up into chat. So the someone has commented the lack of numbers alignment is like every COO versus CFO conversation. You're absolutely correct there. And at some point where there's a disagreement about the numbers, getting those two executives in a room to argue things out, it really does help move things along. All right, so I am going to sort of foreshadow what I think is the last slide in the deck. So I think that this is a great time to talk about that because I have been very hand-wavy so far, talking about general patterns and not about specifics. But one of the resources that I'll share, so this is all publicly available. We'll share the links after the session. But one of the links that I will share is this Power BI adoption roadmap, which is a set of Power BI adoption and data culture resources authored by MVP Melissa Coates, working with me. So I was like her tech reviewer and the sponsor at Microsoft for this project. But in this adoption roadmap, every article, which I'll wave my hands at for right now. So the different areas where a data culture needs to invest, whether it's around a center of excellence, executive sponsorship, monitoring and oversight, all of these different things, there are well-defined maturity levels. So we're basically mapping to some standard industry maturity models where it goes from maturity level of 100, which is often we're kind of doing things, but we don't really know what we're doing, all the way up through a level 500, where there is a culture of efficiency and continual improvement for whatever the thing is that we're talking about. And if I click here, so I'm going to click governance, jump into the data governance section. So if I come here and I look at the maturity levels that are defined for data governance in the context of Power BI adoption, you can, for any organization, you can look at their current behaviors and state and assign a maturity level in that area. So one of the ways to respond to this question, I'm gonna paraphrase your question as, and may I swear, by the way, is that okay? Because we're recording things. I want to swear for emphasis, but only if it's okay. Okay, so the reality is often we're completely fucked. Where do I start? And one way to answer this is do a maturity assessment. So take an honest, hard look at how you are currently performing in these different areas, and then invest deliberately in the areas where your maturity is lowest, because that is typically where you get the best return on your investment. Going from 100 to 200 is often a bigger change than going from 400 to 500. So that's one thing to look at. Another thing to look at is starting small and identifying quick, easy wins. Because nobody has a green field. It's like it's 2021, right? We've had Power BI out there for 6 years now, and so I have customers tell me I have 60,000 workspaces, and I need to go in and like figure out where do I invest, where do I manage, who do I enable, what do I shut down, what can I clean up, like that sort of thing. So in a situation like that, it's a terrifying number of workspaces. Going in with system oversight, so scanning your tenant, understanding what exists, what was created by whom, what's actually being used and accessed. This is often a great way to get started to help you identify where to invest. The other thing is that there will be paths of least resistance or departments of least resistance where there is, based on who the people are and how they're working today, they will be less resistant to changing to adopt new tools or new behaviors. So find those places to invest. But these are things that you can do today, but it's a matter of understanding the terrain and the challenges and how do you go from where you are, which everybody's going to have a unique starting point, to where you want to be, because everybody's going to have a different definition of success getting through the terrain that your current environment has. Remember, I said that it's hard, right? This is why it's hard. So did that answer your question? Excellent. So there, yeah, I'm sorry I didn't have an easier or happier answer, but you're very, very welcome. Yes,
hey,
yes, indeed.
Matthew, this is Jessica.
Yes,
I have a question. So when you're out there evangelizing this, are you having, who is your primary audience for this? Is it primarily sort of mid-level managers, or are you, do you feel like this message is reaching senior executives?
So it has to reach senior executives, otherwise the effort that it can, the results that it can deliver are limited. So very often the people that I'm talking to are the owners of analytics from a business perspective and from an IT perspective inside like Fortune 50 or Fortune 500 customers. So they are director level on the business side, maybe in the CIO or CDO office, or CFO, because the finance org is often leading a lot of these changes. But what they need to do to succeed with following and applying these guidance is typically there needs to be either a C-level executive or someone who is a core part of a C-level executive's leadership team that becomes the executive sponsor and who stakes their success on the success of these efforts. Because if you're a department level manager, you only have so much leverage. And it's typically those C-level executives that have the budget and the clout of their position to both inspire and compel change. So for my conversations, I'm typically, I hate to say this, but I'm preaching to the choir. And when I get into the conversations where there is that C-level executive, like the person that my product owner or platform owner reports to, typically they're already sold by the time that they get looped into the conversation. So the folks that I'm talking to, they've done the legwork evangelizing and communicating inside their organizations because they know the personalities, they know the politics, they know the history in a way that an external person, especially me, I have a few hours of exposure to their reality. I can't tell that story in a way that I need to. Those people that I talk to have the context and the knowledge to make it real and to help it land and stick. So did that answer your question, Jessica? I'm going to take that as a yes.
Oh, yep.
Excellent.
Yep.
Thank you.
All good.
Cool. So I'm gonna wave my hands at a lot of the hard part, because I think that we've talked at least about some of this. We'll make sure that we talk about the important bits. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock as well. And actually, let me ask a question. Since we started at halfway through, do I have until 9:30 my time? So do I have 12 minutes? Or how much time do I have remaining? Excellent. I'll take my time. So we're talking about the people side, the hard side of building a data culture. And if we think back to that definition of a culture is that set of behaviors, beliefs, activities, practices, institutions that are common across a community of people. And two of the most important aspects of building a data culture inside an organization are having a center of excellence and having and nurturing a community of practice. And that center of excellence, which the adoption roadmap has a full article on with different models and pros and cons of each, but these are typically senior IT and business stakeholders that are responsible for the adoption of data and BI tools inside the organization, including representation from the teams that own key data sources, like your SAP platform manager or your supply chain lead, if those are big data domains for you. They include decision makers for people that will decide what we do this semester, like, or what gets funded this quarter and what gets deferred, and the budgets necessary to carry out the actions that are decided on. Because that center of excellence or network of excellence, because for a true global enterprise, it's rare to have just one central group. It's more common to have a federated set of groups, a federated set of centers of excellence that work together. But these are the people who are the experts on the tools, the experts on the data, the experts on the business, and they are sitting in an organizational, like org chart location, where they provide common resources, guidance, and support to the other users across the organization that need to be working with data and BI tools to be more data-driven, to be the data culture that we're trying to become. At some point, if you want to build an enterprise solution, you need enterprise level talent. This is where the experts live. And typically, they are either responsible for the operation and management of Power BI, or they work closely with the admin team. Both approaches can be successful. Where the boundary is, there's lots of different ways that it can work. But very often, that center of excellence will have representation from every major business unit and every major geography from across these global organizations to make sure that everybody knows what everybody else is doing, even though the core center of excellence team is responsible for performing most of the actual actions and producing most of the actual deliverables. Whether or not that center of excellence is the same as that central BI team, like the hardcore IT folks that are doing a lot of the enterprise BI development, I've seen it work both ways, but more typically, they're separate groups. So that central BI team, they're a dev team. They've got their heads down, they're building things. They have like a requirement stream that's coming in. The center of excellence is more about providing resources, providing tools, providing training, making sure that all of these self-service BI users in the community of practice have the answers, the information, and the resources that they need to be as productive and agile as possible. And this is where the right-hand side of the slide, like the broader part of the culture comes in. The community of practice is everyone who works with Power BI, whether they are working as a consumer, just like reading reports and making decisions on the information that's available to them, or a self-service author that is working with either the published shared data sets or possibly with more raw upstream data sources and doing a lot of the BI development themselves. This is what Power BI is all about, right? It's, anybody who's familiar with Excel, they should be able to sit down with Power BI Desktop and build a thing to solve their own problems, as long as they understand the business side of things. They understand the problem domain. Power BI is a low-code, no-code tool that will allow them to implement the solution without having deep, expansive technical expertise. But at the same time, people have questions. Like, DAX is hard. Like, I ask my team members DAX questions like every freaking day, like the simple, trivial DAX questions, understanding how do I solve this complex problem. I could like search YouTube or go out and Google things. I could go out publicly, but it would be awesome if I, as a self-service user inside your organization, that I could go to an internal forum or community or office hours or similar community engagement location, ask a question, get an answer. And very often, if I can do this, and this is something, I know there's a lot of Microsoft MVPs that are on the conversation. What I'm about to tell is basically my MVP story. This is how I got my MVP award before I joined Microsoft a lifetime ago. But I was learning a new tool, and I would go out and search these online community forums for answers because I just didn't know what the heck I was doing. I would go out, I would search for things, I would find answers, I would get on with my job. But then I'd go back the next day and I realized, hey, this other person, he's asking a question that I know the answer for. I figured this out. I answer his question. And then I end up in this pattern where not only am I learning from the community on a day-to-day basis, I am also contributing to the community. And eventually the actual experts that were part of that community, they started to believe that I was one of them because I was there answering questions on a regular basis. And the rest, as they say, is history. The same pattern plays out day after day inside almost every enterprise organization that has taken the time to build a community of practice. So this could live in Yammer or Slack or Teams. The platform itself doesn't matter. What matters is that there is a central location that you consistently direct people to when they have questions about working with data, working with analytics, working with Power BI. And if you send people with the questions there, you also need to ensure that there are people there with answers, which often requires having someone whose job it is or part of their job is to be the moderator or steward for the community. Because if I go there and I ask a question and I never get an answer, I will never come back, right? Oh, I tried that once. It didn't work. I'm going to go out and Google it, or I'm going to open a ticket with IT. So you need to make sure that the community is active and vibrant and timely. And one of the ways that you do this is by recognizing the champions. Like the MVP story that I told, like this is decades ago for antiquated technology at this point, but the patterns still remain. When you see someone going above and beyond, it's like, hey, you're like random finance guy, but you're answering these really interesting, difficult DAX questions. Thank you. So you send them the email to say thank you. You copy your boss on it, or sorry, you copy their boss or their boss's boss on it to make sure that the effort that they're putting in is being recognized in a public and meaningful way. And this encourages them to return. You can build up this self-sustaining cycle, but it takes care and feeding up front. The effort will subside over time, but as you're building this internal community of practice, making sure that you have that you have the right people and the right rhythms in place is vital at the beginning. And I see that Jessica is asking, I have a question. I've been thinking about having a trained service desk, BI in general, and Power BI in specific play into the growth of the data culture. It is absolutely vital for it. But there is often, I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this. There is often a spectrum of support requirements or support scenarios where some things are like the informal ad hoc how do I type questions. There are some things that are more structured, like break fix questions where I'm trying to connect to this data source, I get this error, or I'm opening the tool but it won't install because I'm not an administrator on my machine, like something along these lines. There's a whole spectrum of support or support adjacent topics that need to be taken care of. What fits into a help desk or service desk or through other channels like a center of excellence with office hours or the community of practice where you go to your Yammer channel or Teams channel to ask questions, that will depend on what's important, what fits in with your organization's existing culture. I'm actually going to jump back over into this adoption roadmap documentation. And if I come here and click on this user support channel, you will see that we have a set of different support channels, whether they are more formal or less formal, whether they are internal to the organization or external, like you might need to open a ticket with Microsoft if there's an actual a problem or regression in Power BI, the service. So these are the things that you need to think about. And getting back to the earlier question and response about where do I start, as part of your assessment into the current state, if your organizational maturity for user support is very low, this may actually be a place to invest right from the beginning. And this could be a great test of your executive sponsorship, because as soon as you go to the team that owns your help desk and you say, I need you to support this additional thing, they're going to say, and I quote, give me money, or perhaps I need budget, because this doesn't come free. And if you can't get the budget to do the thing that needs to be done, this is the red flag that your executive sponsorship isn't actually as engaged as they might want you to believe. So yes, if everybody is asking for results and never wants to put in the work, never wants to fund things, never wants to be part of actually building the solution, they just want the results, it's never a good sign. But it's very common in lots of different areas. Which honestly, your question, your timing couldn't have been better. So at this point, as I'm talking through these topics, this is really fucking hard, right? Odds are there is no one on this call that has the clout, the authority, or the influence to make all of the changes that we're talking about. We're talking about forming teams and getting budget and, assigning responsibilities to people in multiple different parts of an organization. This is why that organizational sponsorship or executive sponsorship is so critical. I'm not going to talk about this in super depth today, but if you look at my blog, we'll have the URL up there shortly. I did an article a few months ago about data culture and digital transformation, where very often the most successful efforts to build a data culture are typically driven by business concerns or business priorities, not technology, where the C-level executives are like, oh, we need a digital transformation to be more efficient here, to open a new market, to be responsive against these upstart startup competitors. Those things are the North Star that you can align your data culture arguments and conversations and actual efforts to, because that's what those executives are gonna talk about. And I see a question in chat: when you embark on this journey, do you start by identifying the data sources and ETL stuff, or speaking to the business owners and sketching the reports they would like to see? Very often, I would actually say, look to see, who's bleeding most profusely, right? It's often a triage process where you're looking not necessarily at the best long-term path right at the beginning, but looking to see where I can make the biggest impact today. And for those two different options, for looking at the data sources and speaking to the business owners, very often these two things have to be done together, because if you're looking at the data sources to get the ETL processes in place to make the data available to more people, this is a great way to start. You're basically saying, here's a bunch of stuff that you can use. And then when you talk to the business owners, you will realize, oh, well, there were these things that I missed and these other things that I need to change. But you're already halfway there. But if you take the second approach, where you talk to the business owners about the problems that they're trying to solve and why they can't solve those problems today, and that will then turn into a data discussion, this will help you be more successful with your first delivery, but it will also delay the first delivery, which can have other impacts as well. So keep in mind, there's no one size fits all. Both sets of work are important. I would personally say look for the business side first, rather than looking at the technology side. But I also recognize this is my strong personal bias. It's served me well, but your mileage or your context, your environment may vary. So one sip of coffee. So there's two additional aspects to the community of practice that are important to understand, and then we're going to start moving on to wrap up the presentation. One of them is that you need some sort of central portal where the community will live and where you will put all of the resources that the community needs to thrive. So this is where you will put reports and data, or like links to data, documentation for data sources, all of your training, your guidance, your internal wiki. This is where you have the discussion forum and similar things. But the reason why the portal is important is this serves as a center of gravity for the activities that you're trying to promote. So in my position, I have thousands of Microsoft field people, so like the cloud solution architects, the technical specialists, and account managers that are working directly with Power BI customers around the world. A lot of them, like, they see my blog, they see me on Twitter, they see other things that I do, and they're like, oh, I'm going to ask Matthew a question. So a couple times a day, I get an email where someone is saying, hey, Matthew, my customer has this problem, please help me. And every single time, 100% of the time, I say, no, I can't scale to reply to a one-off email. I simply can't do it. Instead, go here. Like, here's a URL to this site on Teams that my team manages and supports, like the entire Power BI Cat team. We're active there answering questions from these other Microsoft employees. And if you go there and you post this question, not only will the entire CAT team see it, but a global community of technical experts will see it, and they will both be able to respond. And just like you can, they can search to see all of the other questions and answers that are out there. Go there and ask your question. Don't email me because I won't give you the answer via email. And this sounds really harsh, and I always feel a little bad when I'm doing it. But by consistently directing activity to this central location where it's taking place, where there's more visibility and more value from the exchange, you're building up the patterns and you're showing people, go here for things related to Power BI. And they might go there today for a question. They might go there tomorrow for training. They might go the week after to join a user group, like internal office hours type session. You need the portal and you need to drive usage there. You might already have one. You might need to build one, but it's a key part of having the ongoing activity, because a community and a culture, it comes from people working together. And if some random person emails me, nobody else sees it, right? That's not working together. That's just a one-on-one, one-off. So drive the conversation, drive the interaction to that portal. And then the final part of the hard part is that you need to motivate people, and people are hard, people are complicated, people are weird, right? How do you get someone to do something that's a change for them? How do you get someone to do something that might not technically be their job, but it's important for the data culture that you're trying to build? And the diagram on the right-hand side of this slide, I adapted from a Psychology Today article about adult motivation. And according to people who are smarter than me, so according to psychologists, there are three primary motivators for human adults. There is skill variety, where you get to do things that aren't the same day in and day out. Like working in a factory is boring, it's unmotivating. There is task identity. So task identity is saying the work that I'm performing fits into this broader process. Like, nobody wants to track their hours, but when tracking their hours turns into like a paycheck or an invoice, right? You can see where your work today fits into the bigger picture tomorrow. That's task identity. And task significance is the work that I'm doing is making the world a better place. And this could be something like volunteering for Amnesty International or another humanitarian nonprofit. So if you've ever wondered why someone would take a much lower salary to do something for an organization that aligns with their ethical compass or moral compass, it's because of this task significance. But often as well, there is an altruistic aspect to just day-to-day work in more contexts where I know that if I'm spending like 5 minutes of my time where because of my expertise and experience, my 5 minutes might save you 5 hours or a day, that feels really good. I am motivated to do that because of task significance. And the two other aspects of motivation that are modifiers to these core three, autonomy is basically I get to choose what I do, or at least when I do it within the constraints of my job. It's the opposite of being micromanaged. If you've ever had someone who told you exactly what to do and exactly how to do it and exactly when to do it, you didn't want to stay in that job. And then feedback is that when you're doing something good or you're doing something that needs correction, you get timely feedback or timely information from the people that you're working with or working for. And finding ways to incorporate this into your community is really key. Saying thank you, actually meaning it. Like, as I mentioned earlier, like you email them and email their boss when they're going above and beyond or doing something special, making sure that the people that are doing great work, that work is called out and it's recognized. You may not be able to pay them more because they may not be your employees, or you may not have that budget and authority, but you can still make a big difference to motivate these behaviors by remembering everybody's a human, everybody's doing things for their own reason, but there are common ways to motivate and encourage the behaviors that you want. So I'm going to wrap things up with 3 different quotes, and then I'm going to show you a bunch of links. So the first quote is one of my favorite quotes from college, like many, many years ago. In my object-oriented something and something else. Like one of the software engineering classes I took in college included this quote as part of the introduction, and it really stuck with me over the decades. And that is, a complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that works. The inverse proposition also appears to be true. A complex system designed from scratch never works and cannot be made to work. And I can't think of anything that is more complex than a culture. So for me, this is another emphasis that says, start small, solve little problems, iterate. Get a little thing working and then get another little thing next to it working, or get a little thing working and then expand it over time. Don't try to boil the ocean, if I can use one of my least favorite Microsoft phrases, but it fits here. Another quote, which wasn't originally intended to be about data cultures, is from Sun Tzu, this legendary Chinese general. And he said that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, and tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. And strategy is really, what are the goals that we're trying to achieve, and what does success look like? If you can't define what success looks like, if you can't define those strategic goals, don't just work for the sake of working. Like when you're a junior developer, you don't feel like you're adding value. You don't feel like you're actually working unless you're writing code. But if the code that you're writing isn't actually going towards achieving a shared, valued, understood strategic goal, you're only wasting time. You're only making noise. And this gets back to some of the earlier questions as well. Where do I start? Start by figuring out where you're going, right? And on that note, the thing that I want to throw in as my third and final quote. This is from Anna Karenina. This is the opening line from this classic Russian novel, and that is, "All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." And the reason why this fits in for data culture for me is that for all of these hundreds of enterprise Power BI organizations that I've spoken to, the overwhelming majority, like 90+% of them, that have this successful, efficient data culture where the use of data is just something that they take for granted, and they're trying to improve, and they're trying to drive more efficiency and more value from their investments. But for the most part, they've figured it out. They do the things that we've talked about in this session today. The details will differ, but the pattern, again and again and again, the pattern is the same. If you're doing it right, this is what it looks like. But all of those organizations that are in an awful place, you don't have the green field and nobody knows what anybody else is doing. Each unhappy family, each immature organization or nascent data culture waiting to be born, it's uniquely in a bad place. And when we think about getting from where we are to where we need to be, it's basically a matter of saying, I need to get from one side of the river to the other, but because where we are on the river and what the river is like in between is going to be different from company to company, from team to team, and from year to year. There's no simple directions. There's no steps to follow. Instead, it's about understanding the characteristics of what success looks like for your organization and the steps that you need to take from where your unique starting point is to your unique destination. And with all of this said, this is the last of my content slides. So if anybody has been desperately waiting to unmute, turn their camera on, to ask a question or two, now is the time to do it. And if not, I will just remind you that adoption roadmap, about 150 pages of awesome guidance from Microsoft, authored by MVP Melissa Coates, working with me. There's additional documentation, including a 17-part YouTube video plus blog post series that I produced last year around building a data culture, where a lot of this talk's content and themes were based on that series. So what do you think, Augustine? Was it worth it? Excellent. So the one other thing, so I don't see any other questions coming in. So I'll mention that in that adoption roadmap, the topics, so the contents on the left-hand side, we basically have a full article for each of these high-level topics. And in each of the articles, there's a consistent structure where there is the concepts and context that's specific to that article, whether it's governance or compliance or mentoring or what have you. But each one also has a set of considerations and key actions. So these are the most important things to think about as you're moving forward. And each one has those 5 organizational maturity levels defined so that you can evaluate your organization against commonly defined criteria to understand where you are and the steps that you might need to take to become more mature in that specific area. And that's all I got.
Matthew, I have a quick question, if I may.
You certainly may.
So working as a consultant, a lot of times there's a challenge of they want to stand something up quickly, right? Versus teaching the client in a way to say, this is good, and we can stand something up quickly. Remember, between what is it, cheap, good, and fast, you can only pick the 2, right?
You choose one.
Or choose one, right? So, I mean, it's part question, part comment. Like the question part is, how do you gently introduce the concept of not pointing fingers? You know the data is going to be dirty. It's sure as heck it will be dirty, and you will have misalignment on numbers, right? But let's not point fingers and let's try to be civil about it, right? How do you approach that from your perspective?
Wow. So that would be a master class. If I could actually answer that question, I would impress myself very, very much. So let me come at this from a few different perspectives. So as a consultant, you have both advantages and disadvantages in this type of arena. The advantage is that you're being brought in as an outside expert, and because of this, people are predisposed to listen to you, at least in the arena where you've been brought in to help. So don't squander that advantage. The downside is that very often before a consultant is brought in, the client organization has not only identified a problem, they have thought of a solution, and they've brought you in to deliver the solution that they've already thought of. And this stepping back pattern, that conversations early on to force your client to be more explicit and clear and to drive a shared understanding and conversation around the problem domain that they're hoping that your work will help address and what success looks like in the long term. If you can force those conversations, like build it into your engagement model, it's like it's part of the first week, or whatever the first phase of your consulting engagement is, you force that up front so that they are telling you what's important. And then when they're straying, when their actions don't actually live up to the strategic goals that they set, you can, as an outsider, ask the dumb question that the insiders, they don't feel safe asking. It's like, I might not understand this correctly, but I thought that we said this thing, but we're doing this thing. What am I missing? Please help me. Yeah. So this is the way that I would approach it, but it's always hard. And when people in politics, you're, as a consultant, you're always wading into to a knife fight, and you never know who's on whose side.
That's true. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Boy, now that I used a knife fighting analogy, I realize how much I miss being a consultant.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Matthew.
You are very welcome. Thank you for the question. All righty. It looks like things are drying up a little bit. I see someone is typing. You should feel free to unmute and share verbally if you are comfortable. Yes, I went to the big league and got the swords. I desperately miss being able to use them. So that's the downside of the pandemic, is that all of the fun, friendly, consensual violence that defined my my past few years, it's all dried up, and I'm soft and fat and sad and lonely now. Boy, that's a dark note to end on. Yeah. And this type of opportunity, being able to drop in for a user group in Germany and have it fit into my workday, and not have to. And even though I desperately miss Germany, just for the record, just being able to fit it in, it's definitely a blessing. There's a silver lining behind this dark cloud. All right. Well, I am going to stop sharing, and I will let you wrap things up, since it looks like we're wrapping things up organically either way.
Yeah. If there's no more questions coming, then thanks again, Matthew, for this great presentation. It was an honor having you, and really interesting topic. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. And for everyone else, so the meeting, the recording of the meeting will be available to you via the normal channels afterwards. And as Augustine already mentioned, there's a few interesting meetings coming up. Feel free to share that and to connect with us for the next meetings.
All right. Well, I am going to drop. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great evening, or great whatever time of the day it is where you're calling in from. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.